Montana Territory, July 1883. The sun was high and cruel when Rowan Jasper first saw her tied to a wagon wheel, wrists raw and face dusted with blood and grit, like something thrown away by the world. He had not meant to come this far off the cattle trail, but the storm the night before had scattered half his herd and he had spent all morning tracking a wayward steer. What he found instead made his breath lock in his chest. She was still. Not dead, but close enough to make his stomach turn. Her dress, what remained of it, was torn at the sleeve and hem, soaked in sweat and dust. Her brown hair hung in damp, tangled ropes over her shoulders. Her eyes cracked open when his boots crunched close, and she blinked up at him like she was not sure if he was real. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her lips parted. "Water," she rasped. Rowan pulled his canteen from his belt and held it to her mouth. She drank like it hurt, but she did not stop. When she pulled back, she coughed once and groaned. He reached for the rope binding her to the wagon wheel. "I'm going to cut you loose, all right?" She flinched when his knife came out, and he paused, holding her gaze. Her eyes were green, sharp even through the haze of pain and heat. She gave a small nod. The rope fell away a second later. He caught her before she hit the ground. He carried her to his horse, lifted her up behind the saddle, then climbed on in front. She pressed her face into his back and gripped his shirt with trembling hands as he rode hard for his ranch. Her name was June Sutton. She said it on the second day, after she had slept and eaten and let him clean the worst of the wounds on her wrists. "I was supposed to marry a man named Whitaker," she said, sitting on the edge of the bunk in his cabin, her voice low and hoarse. "Came all the way from Ohio. Answered one of those mail-order letters. Thought I was going to be someone's wife." Rowan sat across from her, elbows on his knees, fingers laced. "What happened?" June stared at the floor. "He met me at the station in Helena. Said we'd stop and rest before heading to his place. Next thing I knew, I was tied up. He left me there. With nothing." "Why?" Rowan's voice came out harder than he meant. She gave a bitter laugh. "Said he changed his mind. Said I was too plain. Said he only paid $5 for the ad, so it was not a real loss." Rowan's jaw clenched. He had seen plenty of cruelty, but this was filth. "I was there for 2 days," she added, voice breaking. "No food. Just the sun. You are safe now," he said. "I swear to you." June looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes studied his face, like she was trying to decide if she could believe him. Something in her softened. Rowan let her stay in the cabin while she healed. He moved to the bunkhouse, told his foreman he needed some time off riding the range. But he still worked the ranch, and she watched him from the porch, sometimes mending fence, moving cattle, gentle with the horses, quiet with the hands. She never said much, but he did not either. He brought her food. She washed what clothes of hers he could salvage. They got used to each other's silence. One morning, she stepped outside while he was chopping wood. Her hair was clean now, tucked into a braid, and she wore one of his shirts belted at the waist. She looked stronger than before, but still cautious. "I want to earn my keep," she said. "I can cook. So. I am not just going to sit around." "You do not owe me anything," Rowan said. She lifted her chin. "Let me repay you anyway." That night she made stew. He said little about it, but finished every bite. Days turned into weeks. June started humming when she swept the floors. Rowan built her a proper table to replace the crate she had been using. She asked about his mother's old Bible, which sat untouched on a shelf, and he told her she had died when he was 16. One evening, she was watching the sky from the porch when she asked, "Why did you come looking that far out? No one else did." "Storm scattered my herd," Rowan said. "Lucky steer pulled me off trail." She nodded, quiet a moment. "Might have died out there if you had not come." He looked at her then. Her face was turned toward the horizon, but he could see the edge of her cheek, the curve of her mouth. "I do not believe in luck much," he said. "But I believe in timing." She turned her face toward him, eyes searching. "Do you believe in second chances?" His voice was low. "I think you deserve one." 3 weeks after he found her, she asked to go into town. Rowan hitched the wagon and drove her in. She bought fabric, thread, a few things for the cabin. Folks stared, they always did when a stranger came through, but she held her head high. He was proud of her for that. On the way back, the sun was setting behind the hills. She leaned back on the bench seat and let the wind tug at her braid. "I never had anyone look out for me," she said. "Not really. My father drank himself to death. My mother passed when I was little. Been on my own since I was 14. Rowan kept his eyes on the road. "That is no way for a girl to grow up." She glanced at him. "You ever been married?" "No. Not yet." "Why not?" He thought for a moment. "Never found someone who made me think about staying in one place." She smiled softly. "And now?" He looked at her, then really looked. "Now I think about it." That night, he could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling of the bunkhouse, her voice echoing in his head. The way she had looked at him in the wagon. Like she saw him for the first time. He got up before dawn and went to the cabin. She was already awake, curled on the chair with a book in her lap. She looked up, startled. "I need to tell you something," he said, stepping inside. She set the book down. "What is it?" "I think about you. Not just in passing. Not just because you are here. I think about you when I am working. When I am not. I have not felt like this before. But I am not going to pretend it is not real." She stood slowly. Her eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "I think about you too." He took a step closer. "You deserve someone who would never leave you tied to anything. Someone who would fight for you." She stepped into his arms. "You already did." He held her, and she leaned into him like she had found solid ground. And for the first time in years, so had he. The first frost came early that year. Behind the cabin, the cottonwoods flared gold before the leaves began to fall, and the mornings turned so still Rowan could hear a hawk's cry echo for miles. He rose before the sun most days, but now he found June already up, warming water over the fire or kneading dough with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She moved with quiet purpose, her face calm in a way it hadn't been when he first brought her here. One morning, he came in from feeding the hens and found her bent over a square of muslin, stitching a set of initials into the corner. "Yours?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe and brushing straw from his jacket. She looked up, the needle paused mid-air. "Yours. For the linen chest." He stepped closer, watching the small, careful letters take shape. "That's a thing wives do." She met his eyes. "I know." He didn't say anything else, just sat beside her and watched her finish the last curve of his initial. Her hand never trembled. Later that week, he took her to the horses. She hadn't asked, but he'd seen her eyes linger on the corral when they walked past it each evening. He saddled the gentlest mare they had, a red roan named Sable, and led her out into the yard. June stepped toward them slowly, running her fingers along the saddle horn. "You ever ridden?" he asked, adjusting the stirrup. "Not since I was a girl. A mule, back in Ross County. Not like this. She's steady. I'll walk beside you." She climbed up without help, settling into the saddle like it was a place she'd been meant to return to. Rowan took the lead rope and walked her in slow circles, his hand near the bridle, his voice low and steady. After a while, she let go of the pommel and took the reins herself. "I remember the rhythm," she said. "I used to ride down to the creek to gather berries. Thought I could outrun anything back then." He didn't answer, just watched her find the gate again, the way her spine moved with the horse like she'd never forgotten how to trust something that carried her. That night, she came to his side of the table while he was oiling his saddle. She set down a folded piece of paper in front of him. "I want you to read this." He wiped his hands on a cloth before picking it up. The handwriting was tight and careful. A letter, addressed to the Helena sheriff. She'd written it on her own, explaining what had happened, naming Whitaker, asking that it be sent on to prevent him from harming another woman. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I've been quiet long enough." He sealed it the next morning and rode into town himself. When he came back, she was waiting on the porch, her apron dusted with flour, and her hair pinned up with two slender combs he hadn't seen before. "Did they take it?" "They'll send it by courier. Said they'd look into him." She exhaled slowly. "Good." That evening, the wind picked up. Rowan closed the shutters while June stirred the coals lower. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the bench beneath the front window, listening to the fire crackle. "Do you want children?" she asked, eyes fixed on the embers. He looked at her hands folded in her lap. "I'd like to raise something that grows right." She turned her face toward him. "That's why I asked? I think you would." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. A few days later, they rode out together to mend a section of fence that had gone slack. June tied her braid back with a strip of gingham and carried a basket of nails in one arm. She didn't say much, but her presence was steady, like a weight against his shoulder he hadn't known he needed. They worked until dusk, side by side. He drove the posts, she set the wire. She didn't flinch when a nail caught her palm, just wrapped it in a handkerchief and kept working. When they stopped to rest, she leaned against the gate and looked out at the hills. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't come by." He didn't answer. He couldn't. "But then I remember something," she said. "That I'm not just lucky to be alive. I'm lucky it was you." He stepped closer, took the basket from her hand, and set it down. "I don't want a life without you in it." She nodded once. "Then don't have one." He kissed her then, slow and sure, like a promise spoken in a language older than words. When she kissed him back, her hands on his shoulders, he knew neither of them would ever be alone again. By late October, a hush had settled over the valley, the kind that came before deep snow. The cottonwoods stood bare now, their leaves stripped to the earth, and the air carried a bite that lingered long after sunset. Rowan had started keeping a fire bank through the night, and June added quilts to the bed without saying a word about it. He was shoeing a bay gelding in the stable when she came in with 2 mugs of cider, her cheeks pink from the cold. The horse shifted under the weight of Rowan's grip, but he kept his voice even. "You think we've got another week before the snow sticks?" June handed him a mug and leaned against the stall door. "Maybe less." "I saw frost hanging on the creek grass past noon." He sipped, then nodded toward the open barn doors. "You been out that way again?" "I rode to the bluff. Just needed to see how far I could see." He glanced up. "Looking for something?" She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "No. Just making sure nothing's coming." They stood quiet after that, save for the soft clink of the horse's bit and the creak of leather. When Rowan finished, he set the tools aside and brushed his hands clean. "Had a letter from my sister," he said. "Back in Missouri. She's got 4 boys now, and her husband's taken to breeding hounds." June looked surprised. "You never said you had family riding?" "They don't often. We weren't close, not after I left. But she heard I bought this land." He hesitated. "She asked if I'd ever come back." June traced the rim of her mug. "Would you?" "I told her I wouldn't. Not unless there was a reason to." She didn't answer right away. "Then, what kind of reason?" "Something worth going back for. Or someone." Her fingers stilled. "I don't want to leave Montana." "You don't have to." She looked up slowly, and he met her gaze. "I thought for a long time that I didn't belong anywhere," she said. "Every town, every job, every roof I stayed under, it all felt borrowed. But this place doesn't feel that way." He stepped closer, the smell of horse and cider between them. "Then stay," he said. "Not just for winter. For good." Her breath came out unsteady. "I don't have much to offer, Rowan. You've got more than most. He paused. You've got grit. Sense. The kind of heart that doesn't quit when it's turned rough. She studied him, and something behind her eyes shifted. I never thought I'd hear a man say that like it's worth something. It is. To me. That night, she opened the cedar chest at the end of the bed and pulled out the fabric she'd bought in town weeks ago. She laid it across the table and began cutting with steady hands, tracing lines with chalk while the fire threw flickering shapes against the walls. Rowan watched from the doorway. You sewing something new? She didn't look up. I'm making a dress. Not for church. Not for Sunday. Her voice softened. Something I want to wear when I promise myself to someone. He crossed the room and rested a hand on her shoulder. You'll look like you belong here. You already do. She turned toward him then, and he saw the fullness of her decision written in the quiet set of her mouth, the way she didn't look away. He didn't ask her again. He didn't need to. The next morning, they rode to the preacher's cabin up near the ridge. The wind chased them, sharp and biting, but Rowan didn't feel the cold. June rode beside him, her coat buttoned to the throat, her eyes sure. The preacher's wife opened the door before they could knock, as if she'd been expecting them. Inside, there were 2 chairs, a Bible, and a length of red ribbon the preacher's wife tied around June's wrist when it was done. Later, as they rode back down the trail, Rowan reached for her hand and held it just above the saddle horn. She didn't let go. Not once on the way home. The snow came steady that first week of November, drifting soft against the cabin walls, piling in slow, muffled layers over the fence rails. Rowan kept the animals close to the barn and checked the roof each morning, making sure the weight hadn't bowed the rafters. June spent her hours inside with her sewing and the ledgers, tracking stores and stitching flannel linings into their coats. They fell into rhythm without speaking of it, 2 hands moving in tandem through winter's hush. At night, when the wind scraped branches against the eaves, they read by lantern light, his legs stretched out toward the hearth, hers tucked beneath a quilt she'd pieced together with scraps from the trunks that had once belonged to her mother. One evening, as the fire burned low, she set the ledger aside and pulled out a folded square of paper from beneath the bread tin. I wasn't sure when to show you this, she said quietly, smoothing the creases. It came 3 days ago. From Helena. Rowan took it from her hand and opened it, reading the neat script slowly. His brow furrowed. They found him, she said. Whitaker. He'd done it to another woman. Left her near the railroad yard. She lived, but just barely. Rowan's jaw shifted. They're holding him in custody now, she continued. Said they'll try him in the spring? He folded the letter and set it aside. I'm glad they caught him. I'm sorry they didn't do it sooner. I'm not, she said. If they had, I wouldn't be here. He looked at her then, and she held his gaze. I don't want to leave this land, she said. But I want to make something more of it. Not just survive it. He nodded once. What are you thinking? There's a parcel north of your pasture. Flat land, rich soil. I want to grow things come spring. Not just for ourselves. To sell. Maybe to trade with the mercantile. Rowan's mouth curved, slow and sure. You're already thinking ahead of me. I always do, she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted. That night, he rolled a second cot into the cabin not because they needed it, but because the bunkhouse had grown too quiet without him, and she said the wind sounded worse without his voice nearby. He didn't press her for more. They shared the space like they had always meant to, like their lives had already begun long before either of them noticed. As the days shortened, Rowan taught her how to oil the harnesses, how to spot a fever in the cattle before it spread. June learned quickly, not just the tasks but the land itself, how the cottonwood roots stayed shallow, how the winds shifted from the northwest before a storm. You know more than most ranch hands I've worked with, he told her one morning as she helped him draw water from the well. I've had to learn fast before, she said. But never for anything I cared to keep. Later that week, a neighbor came by, an older man Rowan had known for years, traveling with his daughter and a wagon full of apples wrapped in straw. June offered them bread and coffee, and the daughter, no older than 16, asked her about the cabin, her eyes wide. "You live here?" the girl asked. "With him?" "I do," June said, her voice even. The girl looked at her father, then back to June. "You married?" Rowan set down his mug. "We are." The girl smiled shyly. "You don't look like most wives I've seen." June tilted her head. "What do most look like?" The girl shrugged. "Tired. Cross. You look settled." June's eyes flicked to Rowan, then back to the girl. "That's because I am." That night, after the visitors left and the wagon tracks faded under new snow, Rowan stood by the window, watching the moon rise pale over the ridge. "She's right," he said without turning. "You've settled in. But you've also changed this place." June came to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "I only cleared the dust. You built the bones." He reached for her hand and turned toward her fully. "Spring'll come sooner than we think. That parcel you talked about, it's yours. We'll plant it together." She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his collar. "I want to grow a home here. Not just a crop." "You already have," he said. And outside, the wind quieted, laying still over the snow-covered land that now belonged to both of them. By early March, the snow had begun to pull back from the earth in long, wet seams. The days stretched a little longer, the mornings warm just enough that Rowan stopped needing to break the ice over the trough with an axe. June had hung muslin over the windows to catch the first real light, and the cabin smelled faintly of yeast and sun-warmed wood. Rowan was hauling seed sacks from the dry shed when he heard her call from behind the barn. Her voice wasn't panicked, just sharp enough to pull him around fast. He found her crouched near the fence line, one hand steadying a ewe whose breath came short and fast. "She's laboring wrong," June said, glancing up at him. "I've been watching her since dawn. Something's caught." Rowan knelt beside her, running a hand down the ewe's side. "She's young. Might be too narrow. I can try to guide it," June said. "But I need you to hold her." He didn't question her. They worked silently, Rowan keeping the ewe still while June moved with careful fingers and a calm voice. It took time. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the cold, and her knees were soaked through from the thawed earth. When the lamb finally slipped free and let out a thin, reedy bleat, June sat back hard, breath hitching in relief. "Alive," she murmured. He touched her shoulder. "You did that." She looked over at him, dirt streaked across her wrist. "You weren't the only one who grew up learning how to survive hard things." They brought the ewe and lamb into the lean-to, settled them in fresh straw, then walked back to the cabin without speaking. Once inside, June washed her hands at the basin, her fingers red and raw. "You've got a healer's steadiness," Rowan said, folding her towel after she dried off. She leaned against the counter. "I never learned to read much about medicine. But I can feel when something's wrong. That part's always been there." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of straw from her hair. "You want to learn it proper? If you think the land can spare me a few hours a week, I'd like to. I'll ride into town next week. See if the doctor's got any worn books he'll part with." She nodded, her eyes soft. It'd mean something. To know how to do more than guess. The next day brought a dry wind from the east. They spent it clearing dead brush from the north field, where June planned to plant beans and root vegetables. Rowan noticed the way she tested each patch of soil with her fingers, how she paused when she found something unexpected, a stone polished smooth by water, a bent nail long buried. "You've got an eye for what's been forgotten," he said. "I think it's because I know the feeling," she replied. After supper, she pulled out a folded map he hadn't seen before, the edges soft from handling. She laid it flat across the table and pointed to a stretch of land along the ridge, just past the creek bend. "There's good grazing there," she said. "And enough flat space for a second cabin, if we ever needed one." He looked over at her. Thinking of starting a boarding house? No, she said, smiling faintly. Thinking of what happens if someone else ever needs what I did. A place to land. A place to stay put. Rowan's throat worked before he spoke. You want to make this place safe. Not just self-sufficient. I want it to be more than just ours. I want it to mean something. He reached across the table and took her hand. Then we'll make it that way. Spring came slow, but steady. The lambs lived. The beans sprouted early. Rowan built June a greenhouse frame from old windows the mercantile had thrown out, and she filled it with seedlings and cuttings from neighbors who owed her favors after she helped deliver 2 calves in a storm. In late April, a letter arrived addressed in the same hand as the one from Helena. Rowan opened it while June stood by, her hands still dusty from the garden rows. They sentenced him, Rowan said quietly. 5 years hard labor. June didn't answer right away. Then, I thought I'd feel something more. But I just feel done. That's enough. She nodded. It is. That night, she pulled a wrapped bundle from beneath the bed and handed it to him. Inside was the dress she'd sewn that winter, the one she hadn't worn yet. I want to wear it for you, she said. Proper like. Not for a preacher. Not for a paper. Just for us. She stepped into it slowly, and he buttoned the back with careful hands. Then they stood in the middle of the cabin, firelight between them, and she took his hands. You've given me more than a name, she said. You gave me a home. And you gave me a reason to stay, he replied. A reason to build something that lasts. They didn't need vows. They'd already lived them. Years passed. The greenhouse grew fuller every season. Rowan expanded the barn with help from a neighbor whose wife June had once nursed through a fever. They never had children of their own, but they raised 2 orphan boys who wandered into the valley after losing their mother in a flood. The boys stayed. Learned cattle and plow. Called June Ma before winter came. They never built the second cabin. But they kept a bedroll near the fire, just in case someone ever knocked late, needing a place to rest. Their land stayed quiet, but never lonely. Folks came and went, some staying a season, some only long enough to learn which direction hope lay. June taught women to tend their own soil. Rowan taught boys to be gentle with horses. And together they built a place where no one was ever left behind. Each evening, Rowan lit the lantern while June closed the shutters. Then they sat at the table they built together, hands brushing, hearts steady, the world outside softened by dusk. And in that small cabin, warmed by fire and the long-earned peace of 2 people who had once been lost but now were found, love endured with quiet strength, and without end.